Thank you for your very kind introduction. Yes, so I've been graciously asked by the Brewer Conference to give a brief presentation about the innate advantages that you can have by producing completing drawings by hand, essentially a tool for architects. And you may ask, we have computers, we have AutoCAD and ArchiCAD, Revit and SketchUp. Why would you cement yourself to this type of process? I mean, sure, hand drawings are a great tool if you want to quickly draw up some ideas and visualize. But wouldn't you just leave the rendering to Lumen or Enscape? Well, there is truth to that, I suppose. And I would not judge anyone who prefers working with the finer details of design digitally. But as most things, it's good to keep an open mind. As I was making this presentation and started reflecting, I realized the presentation is more about the process of design and how there's an overlap between visual intuition, which is making decisions based on the visuals of your design. You base it on your own visual judgment, where essentially the only rule that you are following is, does my design look good? And you pair that up with precedent, where you are look at previous designs as an example or guide in subsequent similar circumstances when designing, and how all of this works throughout your process. And, oh, sorry, I can go back. For instance, for my master thesis, I was designing a fish market in the coastal city of Trondheim, and I implemented use of the classical orders. But I wanted to make the detailing of the project site-specific in regards to the function of the building. So I wanted to implement ocean motifs into my design. And certainly there is precedence for this. The Romans certainly thought so, as Vignola refers to in his 5 orders, that there exists an infinite variety of capitals that do not have a name of their own, but can be described collectively as a composite, and how there are local variations to the design of these. For instance, you have animals replacing parts of the detailing. And, oh, sorry. Certainly, there is also a vast amount of precedence if you are working with ocean motifs in those capitals. Just this week, I saw on Instagram shared by Tag, these constructions by the Stone Masonry Group. And there are fish markets in Croatia which have these wonderful designs. And I wasn't even the only student at NTNU that semester who designed an ocean capital, as Magnus Holm did just before me, which really irked me. So moving on. When you are sketching with only paper and pencil, you are essentially drafting outlines and shadows. You are drafting a 3-dimensional object where light hits it in both the C-plane, as you can see in the elevation, but also in the Y-plane, as you see in the plan, or more easily digestible through this cube design. And this is certainly easy enough to construct by hand when you have a flat surface, but the geometry can get quite complex when you are working with a complex shape, as you see in this baluster. And theoretically, you would geometrically construct this shadow with a bunch of difficult geometrics. We don't have to do that, fortunately, because even though the geometry is quite complex, the human eye can perceive shapes quite naturally. It's quite a natural part of us. So you are easily understood by the human eye when you are designing. So going back to the ocean capital, I traced a composite column by hand, and I just started drafting, adding outline and shadow, depth, trying to implement some other symbolism, replacing the countersleeves with ocean waves and seaweed, the volutes with ships or cone shells or even decapitated fish heads. And you are, as you are drawing, there is a high degree of abstraction. But you can critique them by your own visual judgment, if they look correct or not. So you're using the same proportional system and rough detailing, and you can then quickly sketch these new shapes. And you can make them quite unique if you want to. And to just try to defend myself, hand drawing is a tool. It is not the tool. You can certainly use 3D modeling to further refine your design and create even more complex shapes than you originally thought of. As such, you get other viewports and perspectives that you're not normally considering when you're drawing. And you get a much more complete sense of your design. One that is well used with other ways of designing. And you get quite accurate lighting conditions, which is quite useful, so that when you are finally rendering your hand-drawn illustrations, you are more capable of carefully drawing the transitions between one surface to another. They become more important as you strive to reduce the hard contrasts and add more subtle nuances to your design as you complete your renders. So, when we started our classical studio at NTNU, we were required to produce final hand-ins as watercolors. Branko Mitrovic, our professor, exclaimed loudly, I might add, if it is not watercolor, it is not architecture. For me, there was an obvious sense of skepticism to this remark. Rendering drawings takes weeks. It's a long and arduous process in which you have to learn the skills and techniques necessary to produce something that not only looks nice, but which you can adequately use to present as a documentation drawing, where one can look at the produced material and garner information regarding the colors, the depth, the materiality, geometry, detailing, context, and scale of any given project. So when I'm talking about producing something, rendering something by hand, and when I talk about watercoloring as a documentation drawing, I am not talking about these types of illustrations. You're all familiar with watercolor as a medium. It can be used to create these wonderful, colorful, and impressionistic illustrations, which can be used in great effect to encapsulate a mood or the atmosphere of a certain environment and place. And they can even represent quite adequately spatial qualities. These illustrations, however, are created a bit more quickly, a bit more roughly, and I envy that, of course, that you can just create this quite quickly, but it requires immense expertise. But we tend to spend a bit more time when we're designing our projects. We aim to more clearly showcase our thorough investigation of our design. This illustration along with the next few, are illustrations that me and Eir Petersdottir created for Arne Sørdal and Olav Bjerve. It's a reconstruction, proposed reconstruction, of a restaurant here in Oslo that burned down 100 years ago, and with modern installations such as universal accessibility and kitchen facilities. And the original composition was in a dragon style with a heavy foundation ground floor in stonework. And I want to specifically highlight that part of the design. So during the process, as you are drawing up the outlines necessary before watercoloring, everything is flat. You get a rough idea of the geometry and I suppose even the materiality of your design. But as you are watercoloring, adding layer by layer, roof tiles and stone by stone, there's a lot of stones, materiality and coloring becomes much more apparent. But depth is still lacking, as you can see in this very dark illustration, I'm afraid. Perhaps you're not satisfied with how the stonework looks along the foundation wall. It seems a bit flat. It seems a bit plastered on. It does not represent the weight typically associated with a heavy ground floor. So we add more rustification, more depth and variety in the geometry. You use different tones of earthly palettes, as you would find them in real life, adding in layer by layer, shade on top of shade, where you not only compose each individual stone, but how they look in relation to each other, and how they communicate with the composition as a whole. Granularity becomes more important as you add cast and own shadows, and all the smaller motifs you created to catch your eye as you highlight them. All this is to reflect more on the composition of spaces that you yourself have created. You get a better understanding of the holistic view of your project, how all of these themes and shapes interconnect and help you refine beautiful spaces. Going back to my diploma, using this precedence and pulling a bit back on the scale, in the same way for the composite order, say your design, it has a basilica shape, and you want to implement the classical orders you have designed onto the front of the facade. Essentially, you created a basilica shape, and you look to Palladio in Venice, and how he solved his problem of having a main volume and how it meets a sub-volume, two different orders. And you implement that design in your further hand drawings to create a more thoughtful design after you've sketched countless amounts of tracing rolls with coloring and depth and materiality. And when you're happy with that design, you can even go back to your computer renderings or digitally produced drawings to more closely refine your design. And because copying something is not a definition of it being bad, you can use this to create a quite adequately presented facade. And you do this 5 more times in the plan and the section and the perspective, and losing hours upon hours of sleep to create a completed set of hand-drawn illustrations. Thank you.